Are you tired of barely breaking even in your local cash games? And have you ever felt like you're the best player at the table, but you still can't seem to leave a consistent winner? Let's fix that today. If you're still struggling to beat low stakes, it's probably because you're ignoring these key strategies. That's why today we're going to talk about the 10 most likely reasons why you don't beat the low stakes poker games in your casino. My name is Andreas Wagner. I'm a live poker coach who has helped over a dozen players to achieve their goals on the felt. And today you'll get one step closer to finally becoming a bigger winner at 1-2 or 1-3 live. The first reason why most ambitious low stakes players don't achieve the win rate that they would like is simply a lack of attention. A while ago, I was playing in my local 1-2 game with a friend who isn't happy with his hourly rate. After a few minutes at the table, the following hand developed. An early position player limped, the cutoff raised to 10, the big blind called, and the limper called. I was in the low jack and I folded my 9 deuce offsuit. My friend was under the gun +1, he also folded pre-flop. The flop in the hand was 10-3 deuce rainbow. The big blind checked, the limper now bet 20, only the cutoff called. The turn was a 7 that brought in a flush draw. The limper now bet 75 into the pot of 70, cutoff folds. The limper shows pocket tens for top set. What does that tell us? Well, the guy limped the hand as strong as pocket tens, then donked with top set, and then overbet when he still had the nuts, but the board got wetter. Okay, 20 minutes later, this same guy now raises to 15 pre-flop. My friend called the bet, everyone else folded. The flop came king 6-4, the original raiser c-bet big, my friend called. The turn was a jack that brought in the flush draw. The guy in early position now overbet again, and my friend called again. The river brought the backdoor flush. Both players checked. The guy in early position, unsurprisingly, turns over pocket kings for top set. My friend mucked and told me later that he had king queen. To me, it was obvious that the early position player had a huge hand. After he limped pocket tens, I thought he must have at least something like pocket queens. And once he bet so big on the flop and on the turn, it was clear to me again that he must have a huge hand. But this wasn't clear to my friend. Why not? Is he so bad when it comes to reading players? Well, he would have drawn the same conclusion as me if he had only paid attention. But he didn't. When the previous hand was being played, he was texting someone on his phone and totally missed what was going on. And that is exactly the first reason why so many players have a much worse win rate than they would like. They don't pay attention to key information about players' tendencies. The next one is an absolute classic, but it is still relevant even in 2025. If you're guilty of this one, then you will basically have no chance of being a big winner at low stakes. Look at this example. You raise pocket fives, the button and the big blind call. Both are passive recreational players. You flop a set on Jack 9-5 with 2 hearts, you c-bet big, and only the button calls. The turn is a brick. You c-bet big again, he calls again. The river is the king of hearts. You are disgusted and check. Villain now bets 3/4 pot. You have a feeling that you might be beat, but you still call, well, because you have a set. Villain turns over a flush and you lose. So what went wrong here? You played pre-flop, flop, and turn perfectly. The check on the river was fine, but once villain bets, this is a clear fold at live low stakes. And yes, I'm aware that hero has a set, but the problem is that we're filtered heavily until the river, and when the flush comes in, our hand gets downgraded to a bluff catcher. If you have queen jack or a set of fives, it's pretty much the same hand in this spot. Both are nothing but a bluff catcher. Yes, once in a blue moon, villain will overvalue 2 pair, but a recreational player will rarely put in so much money on the river once the flush completes. Remember, we said hero was disgusted by the flush completing card. If villain had 2 pair, he would have been equally disgusted. So the only hand class we beat is a pure bluff. And now tell me one hand that's a bluff on this board after we bet the flop and the turn big. I can't think of any. So the second reason why you don't beat live low stakes poker is because you get married to big hands and bluff catch in super under bluffed spots. The third one is not as obvious because you only lose small pots, but these can add up. Here is a classic example. Villain raises in middle position, you call on the button with Queen Jack of Spades. Normally, I would not recommend cold calling on the button, but let's assume that the blinds are really weak passive players and you were hoping they join the party. But you go heads up to a flop of 8-5 deuce with 2 diamonds and a heart. Villain c-bets half pot. You completely miss this flop, so should you just fold? It depends on the opponent, but this is most likely a range bet like we see them all the time in live poker. Some players would fire a bet into 5 opponents with king high just because they raised pre-flop. Folding here is not terrible in the theoretical sense, but against an opponent who just throws out lazy c-bets every time he raises pre-flop, this would be a blunder. Instead, either raise or call and then take it away later in the hand. So the third reason why you don't beat live low stakes poker is because you don't attack lazy range bets. The examples so far have been mainly for heads up pots, but we'll move to multi-way pots soon, promise. But this next one is a cousin of the lazy range bet, kind of. Say villain raises in late position and you call in the big blind with king 10 suited. The flop is ace 8-4 with a flush draw. You check and your opponent, who is a recreational player, checks behind. If two good players are in this spot, the late position raiser is meant to protect their checking range by throwing some hands like ace queen, ace jack, ace 10, and many lower aces into their checking range. Even two pair are meant to be checked sometimes. But do you think that a typical recreational player at 1-2 or 1-3 will check back a good ace or better when there is a flush draw out there? I doubt it. Recreational players are notoriously bad at protecting their checking ranges on the driest of boards, let alone on wet boards like in this example. Since they also tend to c-bet too much with junk and draws, the most likely type of hand villain has in this spot is some sort of showdown value. This could be a weak ace, pocket kings, queens, jacks, tens, nines. So if the turn card is a break, I would start putting pressure on all those hands. I would overbet the turn. Solvers even go 2.5 times the pot with a hand like 7-6. This will probably get the job done. But you can also just go with a small overbet and then take out the big hammer on the river. He will still most likely fold his bluff catchers. And you will win even more because you win the money he paid on the turn. But what do most players do instead? They check their king high on the turn because they have showdown value. So the fourth reason why you don't beat live low stakes poker is because you don't punish checking ranges. Now let's look at some examples in multi-way pots. You're in the big blind with king jack offsuit. There's a limp in area position, two players call, hijack makes it 10, cutoff and button call. This pot is certain to go super multi-way unless you squeeze here. And oh boy, I would squeeze all day in the spot because the hijack only made it 10 over 3 limpers. That just doesn't scream like a big hand. Make it 70 and you will probably pick up the pot uncontested. But instead, most players call here. And the limpers also call, so we're seeing a flop 7 ways. If I had a hand like pocket fours or ace-2 suited, I would absolutely call in this spot, even though the raise was to $10. But king jack offsuit plays terribly in multi-way pots. Imagine the flop comes king 9-5 rainbow and a lot of money goes into the pot. Do you ever feel confident with your top pair? Even if the flop is king jack 5, I wouldn't want to call an all-in on the flop in a pot against 6 players. And this is reason number 5 why you don't beat live low-stakes poker. You play the wrong hands in multi-way pots. The only hands I really like in multi-way pots are pocket pairs and suited aces, potentially some suited broadways. Continuing with our multi-way pot theme, here's an example of a hand I witnessed at 1-2. A guy raised his pocket nines to 10 and got 4 corners. The flop came ace 9-4 rainbow. The board is as dry as it could be, so our hero decided to be tricky and check. Sadly for him, it checked through. When the 10 of hearts brought in a flush draw and a straight draw, he finally started betting. Two players called. The river completed the flush, so our hero now slowed down and checked again. The other two players checked behind. Hero won the pot with his set of nines, of course. One of the villains showed ace jack, the other one showed ace five. Hero won the minimum in this hand. Why is that? Sure, the run out was not great for him, but that is only a small part of the problem. He sandbagged his middle set when two other players had an ace. They too didn't bet their top pair because they were afraid of someone else having a better hand. So the issue in this hand was that Hero slow played in the wrong spot. And this hero made one more mistake in this hand, and that leads us to reason number 7 why you don't beat the low stakes. And I can tell you, if you're guilty of this one, you won't beat the game for a significant amount of money. So let's look at the river decision in this hand. I bet Hero would have called a river bet after his check, but you see, the players with their respective aces did not bet the river. They would also be terrified that someone could have the flush. So if they bet this river, they would most likely do it with a flush. Maybe once in a blue moon, one of them would bluff the river, but there are not many bluffs available except maybe some straight draws. But even then, they must have it in them to bluff two opponents for a fairly big amount of money. If Hero decides to check call on this river, he will therefore most likely lose money. And this is where I like another move much better. Bet this river small yourself. It is very unlikely that you will get raised as a bluff after you bet. It is quite an ask from a recreational 1-2 player to bluff the river if everyone checks, and it is an even bigger ask to then raise as a bluff. A good player might turn his ace into a bluff once he realizes that you probably don't have a flush when you bet small. But your typical opponent at 1-2 will not turn their top pair into a bluff. But at least one of these two players would most likely have called a smaller river bet. And sure, if one of them has a flush, he might raise, but then you can just fold. If they only have a 7 high flush, they might just call your small bet anyway. So, the 7th reason why you don't beat live low stakes poker is because you don't bet thinly enough for value. This next one is a more conceptual thing, but it shows very well why some players are stuck. Imagine walking into a casino and sitting down at a table where most players are either strong regulars or ultra tight knits. The atmosphere is silent, everyone is serious, and race sizes come straight out of a game theory optimal GTO playbook. Across the room, you notice another table filled with laughter, loose play, and constant all ins being announced. Which table would you rather be at? The answer seems obvious, the second table, of course. Yet many players don't fully understand just how significant this choice is for their win rate. Let's break it down with an example. At the first table, let's assume there are 8 players, 5 of whom are solid regulars, each earning an hourly rate of $15. Two tight players barely break even, and there's only one losing player who gives away about $20 per hour. The total rate for the table is around $80 an hour. With only one losing player, the remaining 7 players must essentially cover the cost of the rake. In this scenario, even the best player at the table could end up losing money simply because there isn't enough to win. Now consider the second table. Here you have 2 top pros, 1 good reg, 3 slightly losing players, and 2 big whales who lose $100 per hour each. The total rake is higher due to the loose action, say $100 per hour. So one of the whales alone covers the rake. The other whale and the 3 slightly losing players provide an additional $115 to be distributed among the pros and the reg. The profit potential at this table is so much higher. And quite frankly, if you play at that first table, you cannot beat it. You cannot beat the rake. So why would anyone in their right mind not ask for a table change? I guess it's laziness or inertia, but whatever it is, you don't beat the game if you don't table select well. Poker is a game of value, and value doesn't mean to overpay for the nice and shiny things, but always check whether you pay a good price for what you get. In some cases, it is obvious that you are getting ripped off. For example, if you hold 7 deuce offsuit and someone raises to, say, 50 big blinds. And conversely, if you have aces and someone raises to 50 big blinds, then you're getting amazing value there. But there are a lot of in-between situations that players either miss or they have a bias that makes them play a hand in a certain spot although they know better. One such situation is if a villain in a 1-2 game opens to $15 in the cutoff. You're in the big blind with pocket sixes. This is like being offered a really juicy pizza, but then you're told that you have to pay $75 for it. Sometimes you might really want that pizza in that moment, so you will buy it even though you know you're getting ripped off. And the same is true for the pocket sixes in this hand. It seems silly to fold this hand to just one pre-flop bet, but if you call in this spot, you have to ask yourself, how can I make money with this? Well, the easiest way to make money would be to flop a set, but then villain would either have to have a fairly big hand himself, or he would have to be a complete maniac who blasts off his entire stack with air. But let's say he's a normal, somewhat timid player, maybe a bit too loose, but doesn't do anything crazy. Well, in this case, there is almost no chance that we will get paid if we flop big. Other ways of making money would be if he checks the hand through and we beat a hand like ace high. But that will have a lot of equity against us on the way, so he might just hit that pair at some point. We could attempt to bluff him, but we are out of position and we have already paid a lot to see the flop. I don't like any of these options, and the reason is simply because he made it $15 pre-flop. Had there been a few more players involved, I would have liked to call and hopefully stack one of them if I hit a set. Had he used a GTO approved size like $5 or $6, I would happily call as well. But for $15, I'm just not getting a good enough price. And yet so many players will call here without even thinking. And this is the reason why they don't beat live low stakes. They are not price sensitive. And the 10th reason why you don't beat the live low stakes has to do with bluffing. There is a myth going around that says that bluffing at the low stakes is not profitable. Well, maybe it isn't the way you do it, but that's because you're doing it wrong. Here's how most players at low stakes go about bluffing if they ever decide to run a bluff. Let's go back to a hand from earlier in this video where villain raised in late position, you called in the big blind with king 10 suited and the flop check through on ace 8-4 with a flush draw. We said earlier that villain's range is very capped, and we said that you need to attack that. Okay, so you pluck up the courage and bet half pot on the turn. Villain calls. On a brick river, you bet half pot again, and he calls with his pocket queens. So what did we do wrong here? It was the size, of course. In deep stack poker, you need to go big. The game is called no limit for a reason. How would you feel with pocket queens on this board if your opponent bet $45 into a pot of 20 and then followed it up with a $180 bet into a pot of 110 on the river? They will feel equally uncomfortable. So if you want bluffs to have a chance of going through at low stakes, you have to make them significant. Because the 10th reason why you don't beat live low stakes poker is because you don't use overbets. If you get better in these 10 spots, your win rate should move up incrementally. But if you want to take your game to the next level, then check out these 5 ways to exploit your opponents at the live low stakes.